Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's talk, all about the emergency services. The headline I put here, Twos and Blues Emergency Services in the Archives, I realised could have a double meaning, the fact that we might be on fire or flooded or something, have loads of emergency services in, but that's not the case. It's just about some of the records that we have. And like most people, I suspect, I had quite a checkered knowledge of the emergency services. They've always been there for us. But as I wrote this talk, I realised that the actual history behind them is quite fascinating. So what I've done is I've split it into the three main services, so ambulance, fire brigade, and police, and we'll go through those in turn. So we'll start off with the ambulance service. So we can actually trace our modern ambulance service right back to 1080, when a hospital had been founded in Jerusalem by monks, and their purpose was just to care for the many pilgrims who became ill on their travels to the Holy Land. And basically, that's not working. There we go. The men and women who worked there were members of a religious order, and they were known as the Hospitallers, and they cared for anyone without distinction of race or faith. So they'd treat Christians, Muslims, anybody at all. Afterwards, when the Crusaders captured Jerusalem, the Hospitallers also took on a military role and then became known as the Knights of the Order of St. John of Jerusalem. So the order spread sort of round about the sort of the European world. And in the 1140s, they established an English headquarters in London in Clerkenwell Priory, and this lovely picture of a drawing of it. But when Henry VIII split from the Catholic Church and established the Anglican Church, the order in England was dissolved because it was a Catholic order, and all its lands and wealth were seized by the crown. Surprise, surprise. But that wasn't the end of it, because when Mary I came back to the throne, the order was briefly restored, but then it was dissolved permanently when Elizabeth came to the throne. And Clerkenwell Priory actually became headquarters for the office of the Master of the Revels. Edmund Tilney was there, and it was where at least 30 of Shakespeare's plays were licensed for performing there. So if you know your Shakespeare in Love and Simon Callow doing the wonderful Mr. Tilney, this is where he was based when he wasn't knocking up the globe. So the order sort of languished in obscurity, but in 1877 it was revived, and it was revived in the shape of the St. John's Ambulance Association. And the modern order was humanitarian in its aims and purpose, and it recognised the need for public first aid and ambulance transport services, as there was no such scheme existed in industrialised England. 1877, no such thing existed. Its first uniformed first aiders appeared back June 1887. They were known as St. John Ambulance Brigade, and their main aim was to teach first aid in large railway centres and mining districts, because this is where they felt it was most important. In 1888, however, the organisation was granted a royal charter by Queen Victoria, and with that charter behind it, it began setting up units right across the country. And Gloucester's St John's Ambulance Association was established on 3rd of November 1881. It formed at a public meeting at the Tolsey, and that was convened by the Mayor, Joseph Reynolds. And this is the very first page from their minute books that we have here at the archives. And the main resolution, which you can see part of it down the bottom there, stated that it is desirable to establish in the city of Gloucester a centre in connection with St John Ambulance Association. So by this time, there was a real public sort of drive to try and make things better for people who were injured on the roads or anything. This committee elected 10 people, and it to run the centre under the auspices of St John's Ambulance Association, who were quite supportive of this, I should say. And they appointed a president, a chairman, treasurer, and a secretary to take on all the necessary roles. Just like today, the St John's Ambulance Association ran training courses to teach people first aid, and we got this lovely certificate. It's a bit battered now, but it's a certificate issued to William Withers by the Gloucester St John's Ambulance Association, and I'm sure many of us have done their training courses today. They are still run, and they are still an excellent organisation with which to join and help. So there were other St John's units around, so not just Gloucester. So as time passed, little units of St John's Ambulance Association sprang up all over the place. And these are just four from several that I could have used. So the top left there, you've got the St John's at Nailsworth. Then you've got the Midland Railways. They had their own association of that St John's Ambulance. Then bottom right, you've got the Wagon Works. That's their unit. And then even a tiny little place like Orst had a unit, and this is a picture of theirs, and all in uniform, apart from the Midland Railway people. But you can see just how important it was to get these units going, which I think is absolutely wonderful. So looking at actually ambulances as opposed to the organisation, the first ambulances were simply carts or wagons that were used to carry injured people to the nearest hospital or doctor, if anyone existed. This is an example. This is Tewkesbury Hospital's ambulance cart taken around 1908. It was a two-wheeled cart, not a wagon. Wagons have got four wheels, and now it's horse-drawn or people-drawn. You could easily drag that. We know that their larger ambulance wagons had a standard fit-out, and this is a view of drawing of one inside one. So you literally got two stretcher cases there, or beds for people. The St John's Italy also created what were essentially mobile hospital units for casualties. This is one that was based in Bristol, and to our eyes, it looks very much like a prefab or a gypsy's Vardo on wheels. But it had nurses, and inside there's equipment. I believe in some of them there is even an operating table. But I love the fact it's got the little door, the lace curtains, and everything. It's such a fascinating little photograph. The Gloucester Railway Carriage and Wagon Company, they built ambulances for military and civilian use alongside all their other horse-drawn wagons. And this ambulance is one of a couple that's taken from their 1900 catalogue. And, you know, you can see it, this is obviously a sales catalogue. It tells you what you've got coming with it and what accessories you've got. I do like the fact that at the bottom it's got two seats and a surgical chest. So presumably somewhere there's a bag of surgical instruments in there. These could carry two stretcher cases or 16 injured men if they were just sat. So quite effective wagons. In the Second Boer War, the mounting British Army casualties forced the government to place an order with the Railway Carriage Company for their ambulance wagons, because there are more and more British troops were getting injured, and they realised the medical provision wasn't quite up to it. And so they think they placed about two orders. This is one such order. They're coming up George Street in Gloucester, which only existed a stub next to the railway station now. Presumably they've come up here from the wagon works, and they're heading towards the actual railway station, which is just sort of to the right here. Presumably they are then going to get loaded onto trains and taken to Southampton or Bristol to be ferried out on boats to South Africa. And if you want to make a replica, well, we've got the original engineering drawings for the company's March 6 ambulance wagon. So it's got all the dimensions, everything you need to know to make yourself a model. So if you're feeling keen, come up and have a look at these, and then we'd love to see the result. So World War I saw the introduction of motor ambulance cars, although actually these are only initially used in Britain, as the Army Command distrusted them. They always thought they were breaking down. And so wounded soldiers overseas in France and elsewhere really had to endure horse-drawn ambulance wagon journeys to get to hospital, which wasn't the best way of doing it, because you know what the roads were like in France and Belgium at this time. But at home, however, there was lots and lots of fundraising. Donations and public subscription were introduced, and these provided many motor ambulances. And this is a wonderful photograph of three brand new motor ambulances at Cirencester in 1914, so quite early in the war. These would largely be funded by Lady Bathurst and then by public subscription. So, you know, everybody was trying to do their bit and producing these wonderful machines. So at this time, most Gloucestershire towns had their own first aid ambulance provision. And this is the transport section of the Cheltenham Red Cross. This isn't St John's, this is the Red Cross. The Red Cross was formed in 1870 as the National Society for Aid to the Sick and Wounded in War. That was formed as a British organisation following the creation of the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, which was formed in Europe in 1863, and which of course is still going today. Um, our society was renamed the Red Cross in 1905 and did eventually merge with these Red Cross and Red Crescent organisations purely for sort of organisation purposes. But you can see the numbers of, I like the vans here, the ambulances, lots of different makes. So they've obviously been sort of like used what they could where they could afford to buy it. But a large number of personnel, and again very similar in dress to the St John's. Post World War One, it was in 1919 that the first real ambulance service began, when the Joint Council of the Order of St John and the British Red Cross Society decided to establish a service throughout the country. So they sort of like merged their ideas on how best to run them. Wartime ambulance was released for civilian use, although many were initially horse-drawn, not like this rather nice motor ambulance here, which is a Crossley on the Crossley website. Then in 1925, the Public Health Act provided for transport of non-urgent cases and ambulance services, and then they really did start to spread around the country. By the 1930s, motorised ambulances were becoming more common, and being faster, more efficient and more comfortable for patients, they helped to reduce response times and also improve the quality of the care that the injured received. So again, great strides were being made in this interwar period. More importantly, in 1937, 999 telephone number was introduced. And this is a great photo of some of the ladies at the telephone exchange operating them, and a classic old phone. So, you know, where do we be right at 999? It's the one to call for every emergency. In World War II, as had happened in World War One, numerous ambulances were purchased via public subscription. This is one provided by the people of Nailsworth. It's an Austin K2Y ambulance, could carry 4 stretcher cases or 10-seated casualties. Over 13,000 of these lovely vehicles were made at Longbridge in Birmingham, and they were always affectionately nicknamed Katie or Katies. And of course, they were made famous by the wonderful film Ice Cold in Alex, which I did find out the other day is based on a true story, believe it or not. Novelized, but based on a true story. But yeah, we all love the ambulance in that one, and there she is, a Katie. So, National Health Service Act 1946 gave county and borough councils a statutory responsibility to provide emergency ambulance services. Initially, many just contracted this role out to the Red Cross or St John's ambulance to provide it. And these are the Cheltenham ambulances just after the NHS formation. And again, I think you'll look at me, they look fairly old for like 1946, don't they? We forget quite how sort of elderly looking some of these vehicles were. That remained the case up until the local regovernment organisation of 1974, which saw ambulance services transferred to central government control. They then consolidated the 142 services that existed into 53 regional or area health authorities. And of course, since then, costs, overruns, etc., lack of investment has seen these all merge, and now there are just 31 NHS ambulance trusts in England. And this is where we are today. So we've got a lovely ambulance provision across the county and across the country, and long may we be thankful for it. Moving on to the fire service, equally complicated history, to be honest. Medieval cities, of course, fire was a constant threat, mainly due to close-packed wooden buildings and the use of open fires for heating and cooking. So it's natural fires are going to occur. Gloucester burnt down in 1122, 1190, 1214, 1222 and 1223. You can imagine the 1223 fire, there probably wasn't a lot left to burn because it all burnt the year before. But most medieval cities and towns had runs of fires like this. Tile was the usual roof covering by 1273 because thatch roofs were being penalised as a fire risk, and we're not quite sure how this worked. Presumably, the borough sort of officer would come round and place a fine on your house if you didn't have a tile, you had thatch, but we're not quite sure. But even so, timber framing remained the main building material until well into the 1650s and even into the 1700s. To try and reduce the fire risk, People living in the city were only allowed to have a fire in the hearth from 4 a.m. till 8 p.m. And this was signalled by the curfew bell in the tower of St Mary de Crypt. And apparently this tradition continued until World War II, which is fascinating. I've yet to find proof of that, but it's stated in Victoria County history, so it's got to be good. So prior to the 1600s, firefighting generally based on the local community where public spirited citizens would be alerted to a fire by muffled peals on the church bells. Um, these volunteers would congregate hastily to fight the fire using whatever equipment was available: ladders, leather buckets, axes and fire hooks. These were used for pulling down buildings, and they, to be honest, they were usually the most effective method. And in this woodcut you can see those being used here. Gloucester maintained fire buckets at the churches and other places in the city. Fire hooks were at the Corn Market house on Eastgate Street, and the buckets were being purchased from a fund made up of fines imposed on new burgesses. So you came into the council, you paid a fine. Part of that fine was used to actually fund the fire buckets. So you think Gloucester was, by this time, was fairly well protected from fire. In 1836, jumped about 150 years, the firefighting equipment was placed in the care of the city police force. In 1838, it was decided that the city police force should be drilled and instructed as a fire brigade. And this is a picture of a 19th century police official from the Gloucestershire Police Archives website. So the City Force Fire Brigade was provided with a new engine and modern equipment in 1849. But in reality, until the early 1900s, the bulk of all firefighting in the city was carried out by insurance companies. And we know that two of these companies maintained fire brigades in the city by 1841, and by 1867, three of them did. So they were the ones responsible for the fighting. Here's a couple of examples. So you've got the Norwich Union, which is still going today, and the Liverpool and London and Globe. You also had ones like the Phoenix. And in 1912, the corporation formed a new city fire brigade, the first official one, because these insurance companies decided to disband their brigades. But instead of making the boroughs pay for them, they gave all the fire equipment away to the city for free. And at this time, I imagine this was going on in other cities and towns around the county as well. So then in 1913, a motor fire engine was bought and a new fire station was built at Bearland, excuse me, which it's still there today, although it's not a fire station anymore. It used to be a great transport museum. It's in limbo at the moment, I believe. By 1949, we'll look at some of the history before that later on. The City Brigade had a full-time strength of 50 men based at Bearland, and there was also by now a second station at Barnwood. You can see in the bottom right there. And in 1956, a new fire station built on Eastern Avenue was opened. I'm sure many of us remember this station. It's now long gone, and it's an industrial estate. So in 1938, a major change occurred for fire brigades when the Fire Brigade Act was passed, and it made all county boroughs and districts fire authorities and required them to provide a fire brigade and such fire engines, appliances and equipment necessary to meet their task of putting fires out in their own areas. This lasted for 3 years until 1941, when, due to war, the National Fire Service was created from all these local authority brigades. There's about 1,600 of them, and also the Wartime National Auxiliary Fire Service, which is, again, I've not found out much about these. It's quite hard to find good information on them. And this is a little picture, shows the Gloucester National Fire Service Brigade on a training exercise down near the docks. It's a very nice picture from the Citizen there, one of the better ones. However, post-war, 1948, everything reverted back to the pre-war situation, and the Fire Service Act 1947 disbanded the National Fire Service, seems a step backwards, but returned all fire services back to local authority control. And again, like in the ambulances, this situation lasted until 1974 local government reorganisation, when all the local fire brigades were merged into one service, the Gloucestershire Fire Service. The exception to this were the brigades in the south of the county, which were transferred into the Avon County Fire Service, so ones like at Yate and places like that. Today, the service is known as the Gloucestershire Fire and Rescue Service. It's got 21 community fire stations, 16 accrued by retained firefighters, that basically means part-time ones, and 5 by whole-time or a mix of whole-time and retained firefighters. And they do a cracking job, has to be said. We've got 33 frontline fire engines strategically located across the county Gloucestershire. Plus, there are also some specialist units that they've got as well. Places like Gloucestershire Airport and the Cotswold Airport have their own firefighting equipment. They have to have that by law. But the county brigades would help in any events if they could. Quick look at some of the fire insurances here. These are some certificates we've got here. So from the mid 1700s, fire insurance grew. These are certificates from the Royal Exchange Assurance and the Phoenix Fire Office, 1897, 1873. The first one at the top right is from the Dutton family for some of their property in Great Barrington and Windrush, while the second one is the Cheltenham Improvement Commission's fire insurance. We're not quite sure what this would be for. They must have had some buildings or something somewhere, I think, but I've not really looked into it. If we look at fire engines, so the first fire engines began to appear in the late 1600s. Gloucester had 2 by 1652, probably very similar to the ones shown here. They were horse-drawn and required a minimum of 5 people to work. So 4 people would be pumping. You can see on the big arms of the pumps there, while the other one would direct water out through a hose. And of course, these did not have a constant pressure that varied with the amount of pumping that was done. So although they were a great improvement, they weren't overly effective. We know that in 1656, part of the Holy Trinity Church, which is one of the churches now gone, it was sat down in the middle of Westgate Street. It was adapted to house these fire engines, and in 1702, a new engine house was built adjoining the tower of the church. And of course, these are now long gone. In 1741, the city had 4 fire engines. One was a new one made by the fire engine maker Richard Newsham, and this was very similar to the picture you see there in the top right, but it could raise water up to a height of 30 feet, 10 meters. So quite a good, very, very powerful engine. And to work all these engines, the corporation appointed 6 firemen, and these were required to practice with the equipment every 6 weeks. So, you can imagine that, 6 men only, that's 1 spare to work one engine. How they work the other engines, we just don't know. But a major advance in firefighting came with the introduction of the steam-powered fire pumps. First one was around about in 1829. This example is from the Duke of Beaufort's private fire station, the fire engine. He kept it on his Badminton estate, and it's now in Bristol Museum. It's behind the scenes. I don't think you can see it now. But wonderful beasts. They were horse-drawn, and they had an onboard steam engine which drove a double-acting pump to pump the water. So steam could, in the later ones especially, steam could be raised to working pressure from cold water in less than 10 minutes. So as soon as the fire bell rang, basically somebody would actually light the fire onto the pump to get the steam engine warm, and then while it was traveling to the fire, they were building the fire up. By the time they got to the fire, they should have enough pressure to actually pump the water. And coal for these were kept below a little bunker below the front axle. Obviously, if they were fighting a major fire, they would have to get fresh supplies of coal, but that was around everywhere, so it wasn't too bad. So a couple of lovely pictures here. I think we've seen them before. They show Stroud Urban District Councils, Merryweather and Sons, horse-drawn, double vertical boilers, fire appliances, fighting a fire at the top at Workman's Timber Mills, and then the bottom one is a training photograph at Grist's Merritt's Mill at Inchbrook. So the only water these actually carried was for the engine's boiler to power the pump. To find water to fight a fire, they had to use an alternate water source, a hydrant when they came in, a pond or a stream. And on both these examples, you can make out hoses leading down into water sources here. There's one, top one's going into a pond, into a stream, and the other one is into a brook. So they needed have this water source. This water was also used to actually power the boiler if the steam engine ran out of its own water supply. And then, given how long a fire might be fought for, this was a possibility. So other towns in the county had their own fire brigades. So Cheltenham, for example, Cirencester did. This is the Minchinhampton Fire Brigade with their fire engine. You can't really see the boiler there; it's well hidden, so it must be quite a small one, I think. Interestingly, as early as 1755, Minchinhampton purchased a fire engine by public subscription and built a house to house it. You think they're very advanced. The committee maintained the engine, and in 1931 they built a new engine house. But oddly, this was still worked by volunteers until 1864, when the Fire Brigade was actually formally created. So all this time earlier, they had to rely on their volunteers. We have a couple of nice photographs of this one, though, and like all other towns and cities, Minchinhampton imposed charges for the use of the engine, and this is a fascinating notice board by them. For the Minchinhampton Fire Brigade, shows the scale of charges that were charged for using the engine, and it's really good. You could linger on this almost all day and read about it, but there's just a couple of points I'll bring out here. So the use of the engine per day for 12 hours would cost you £1, 1 shilling, about £100 today, but this didn't include the cost of the horses used to tow it, so you'd have to get them, hire them as well, and there's no price on those, so presumably they drag horses off the street more or less. With the engine, of course, you had to have firemen. So if you had firemen for 3 hours, it would cost you £2 and 10 shillings, which is about 250 quid for 3 hours today. If you had pumpers and helpers along, there'd be a shilling an hour. And I do like the fact that if you wanted the fire bell rang, that cost you 2 shillings and sixpence. You know, amazing. Today we don't think anything like that. It just rings and they're gone, but it's great. This is a picture of the Cheltenham Fire Brigade, 1885. Rather nice photograph. You can see they've got a couple of appliances, a cart and a ladder. It also looks like, you see on the bottom right there, you can see it looks like it's that big hand pump rather than like the World War II ARP stirrup pumps. And on the left, you notice the chap is holding something that looks like a big sword. That is a sort of tube of hydrant, goes into the hydrant on the ground. So by this time, fire hydrants and fire mains were being laid around the county, especially in the towns. So this is we've seen this one before. 1910, one of Stroud UDC's Merriweather and Sons horse-drawn double vertical fire appliances. This is a common type of appliance used by urban authorities. Why do I include this one? I'm sure you know why. This was sent by a girl to her sister. It's a postcard, and if you look close on the left-hand side, you'll see the fireman has an X by him, and on the reverse of this photograph, the girl has written, "I have put a cross by the one I'm going to meet tonight." So this is like showing her sister, does she approve of this young man that I'm going to see? It's a lovely photograph and really good bit of social history. So, like most town fire brigades, there were rules for the use of their engines. These are the rules enforced for Tewkesbury Borough Council's fire engines in 1843. This is a great one because the main rule was that fire engines could only fight a fire if the parish to which the fire engine was going had subscribed to support the service. And a lovely side effect was that it rated local villages in a hierarchy. So you had class 1, class 2 and class 3 villages. So Twinning here, I'm sure Gemma would appreciate this one. Twinning was rated above Gotherington. Twinning was a class 1. Gotherington was a class 2, and poor old Conderton was a class 3. So it's really interesting. And I think these largely depended on how big the villages were, how many people, what the potential fire risk was. But all told, subscriptions for 1843 brought in £104, about £8 today, give or take. But in addition, so if your parish had to pay its fee. In addition, the engine call-out cost was £3 per engine, about £240. But the post also gives a little bit of insight into how the brigade worked, as under each engine had to be dispatched under the guidance of a borough engineer and 10 firemen. And if you didn't get that, it wouldn't go. These are the rules for the Cirencester Fire Brigade and show other aspects of working. First thing, really, bigger place. Cirencester had a superintendent, a foreman, an engineer, and at least 18 firemen. When the alarm had been raised, the roll call was called 5 minutes later, and only men who were present were paid. And they were paid at the rate of a shilling an hour, which is not an inconsiderable sum for back then. Interesting though, the first man to arrive would, as soon as the second man arrived, call the superintendent. For doing this, he got a bonus of 2 shillings and sixpence, about £8 today for doing so. So that just seems rather odd, but that's how they worked it. And again, here the firemen themselves were divided into following classes. So you could be a class one fireman. This would mean you'd been trained in the delivery of the water, i.e., holding the hose. You were also allowed to move the hoses, and you could check the hoses, the joints on the hoses. If you're a class two fireman, you had to work the engine and seek out water. And if you're a class three, your role was to clear the way to let the fire engine through, check the buildings, organise bystanders, erect any ladders, and then rescue people. So probably you had the most dangerous job, even though you were the sort of the lowest paid on this scale. So the Cirencester Brigade, we also have records of their annual register of their fire brigade personnel. And here's just a page from 1888. It would give the men's names, their class, i.e. class 1 or 2 or 3, like we just seen, the age in the year 1888, and when they were first appointed to the brigade in their signature. So a nice little bit of information there. And there's several years for this one. So with ships bringing wood from the Baltic and Canada to Gloucester, the banks of the canal were a vast timber yard. Not quite so bad today, but there's still lots of timber down there. And when you add in the dock warehouses, which are full of cereals and flour, both of which could spontaneously combust, the docks were a major fire hazard for the city. And so in 1906, the City Fire Brigade took delivery of the fire float Salamander, which was funded by local merchants via the Chamber of Commerce, the Dock Company, and also the Gloucester Corporation. And this is a lovely photograph of it. It's not often you get nice photos of this boat. So she was built by the local shipbuilders Abdella and Mitchell, based at Brinscombe, and fitted with fire pumps made by Merriweather and Sons of London. And the Salamander was a state-of-the-art vessel. This, I can't emphasise this enough. She was a wonderful thing. She had water pump jets for propulsion, and she was fitted with enough hoses to fight fires up to half a mile from the canal. So, what a package this beast was. And this is a lovely photograph, courtesy of the excellent Gloucester Docks and Sharpness Canal past and present website. Shows her in a practice run with 7 water pumps in action. And it looks like, if you look halfway through midships, just above the centre of firing, it looks like there's another pipe, another pump there. So maybe she had 7 or 8 water pumps that she could use to fight fires. So a wonderful craft. First major incident took place not long after her commissioning, when she fought 3 fires in one night after an arsonist set fires in Nick's Timber, Joseph Griggs' timber yard, and finally Price Walker's yard. All the fires were eventually extinguished, and the Gloucester Journal reported the fire float shook and shuddered with their tremendous exertions, and tongues of fire shot 3 or 4 feet out from her funnel. And it's one of the problems with steam engines. They do create smut and sparks, which is why currently lots of the steam railways aren't allowed to be running steam trains, because the ground's too dry. But this was a really unusual incident, and police investigating the fires later arrested an employee of one of the yards who admitted he'd started the blazes just because he wanted to see the Salamander in action. You believe that? He was sentenced to 6 months hard labour, and on his release, he provided with an assisted passage to Canada, where there was more things for him to burn, I suspect. And Salamander remained in operation as a docks fire boat or fire float until 1955, when she was sold. And there is no provision down there for one today, which is a shame, because you'd think it might be useful. So let's look at the fuzz. Okay, so arguably, watchmen were the first city police force. In Gloucester, we know they were about from 1295. The borough appointed them and gave them powers to arrest and detain strangers they encountered at night. The borough, however, also maintained sergeants at mace and bellmen to keep law and order, and these were then supported by a body of constables. By 1860, there were 2 constables each in each of the east and south wards, and 4 each in the west and north wards. So These basically comprised a sort of an early police force. While the constables patrolled in the day, the watchmen patrolled between the hours of 9 and 6 a.m. They're provided with watch boxes, probably by the town gates, although this isn't certain, to shelter in from rain, etc., and were given a lantern, a staff, and a rattle with which they could attract attention. And it's a lovely picture by Roland, the son of a classic night watchman. So watchmen were very poorly paid. So many were old men, and they were reluctant to put in a lot of effort, and they were often found asleep in their boxes or in pubs. They became known as Charlies after 1663, when Charles II set up a force of paid watchmen to patrol the streets in all the kingdom's towns and cities. But they often became objects of fun, and men and children would often attempt to bait them, very often tipping over watch boxes with the watchman inside, as you can see here from one of the Crookshank images of a Tom getting the best of a Charlie, basically, which is, I think is very cruel. City police. So, say from 1769, one of the sergeants at Mace became the High Constable of Gloucester, effectively becoming the head of the city police. Uh, Little then changed in 1836 when a full-time uniform police force was formed by the Borough Watch Committee under the 1835 Municipal Corporations Act. This force comprised a superintendent, 3 sergeants, and 12 constables. Corporation officers and 4 watchmen of the Gloucester and Berkeley Canal Company were also sworn in as constables to enable them to assist the police if required. Very interestingly, that the press at this time referred to the constables by their collar numbers, not names. So this is a lovely thing from the Gloucester Journal. Anne Jordan was charged by policeman number 5 with being drunk in the streets on Sunday night, and also with using abusive and gross language to the police. In consequence of the frequent appearance of this lady before the magistrates, she was committed to the city prison for 1 month. So it's quite a fun one. And the badge there is a badge of what they wore on their jackets. So we know that one of the sergeants, like a live-in sergeant, he lived at the city lockup, which was on the city jail on Southgate Street. So if you look at the picture on the right-hand side there, the police station, I've put a zoom in on there. It's just on the right-hand side by the long wall. We know this station and this city, this jail, was rather crowded, and it didn't last that long. By 1836, police forces had been established in Cheltenham, Tewkesbury, Dursley, Winchcombe, and Stow-on-the-Wold. But on the 27th of August 1839, the County Police Act was passed by Parliament, and this allowed justices of the peace of the quarter sessions to establish police forces in their counties, paid for out of the county rates. Following this, at a meeting of the County Quarter Sessions on the 15th of October 1839, it was proposed that this Act should be adopted for Gloucestershire. And the Clerk of the Peace was then given instructions to raise a force of 250 men. And at 1 o'clock on Tuesday, the 15th of October 1839, same day, Gloucestershire Constabulary came into being just before the Wiltshire force did, by about an hour, we think. So this today makes the Gloucestershire Police the oldest county force in the UK, which is something to be proud of. So initially, however, Gloucester, Cheltenham and Tewkesbury police forces remained independent of the county force. All the other places joined them. But by 1859, all of them emerged with it to give a true Gloucestershire Constabulary. And these are some of the lovely pictures from the police archive here of various officers at various places. So many police officers lived with their families at their country stations. A lovely photo. This is PC Stafford with his family in the doorway of Withington Police Station in 1906. That building is still there, although it's right next to the road, but still a lovely place. We don't know who this officer is, but he's obviously in a country, looks like it's a country house. His rather stern look, I always feel, is something to do with the 6 kids there, which are probably his. And I think if you had 6 kids, you'd be ever stern look on your face as well. 1861, so not really too long after the formation of the force, the first recorded murder of a serving Gloucestershire police officer occurred with the death of Sergeant Samuel Beard. He was attacked at night by sheep rustlers near the Speech House in the Forest of Dean. And The next day, 4 local men were arrested and taken to Speech House, where Sergeant Beard, despite his injuries, was able to positively identify them in front of a magistrate. But very sadly, a few days later, he died of his injuries and left a widow and 6 young children behind him. The attackers were all convicted and sentenced to 15 years imprisonment with transportation to Western Australia. Something about the forest, I'm afraid. In November 1895, a second police officer, Sergeant William Morris, was murdered on duty. He is the dapper-looking gentleman on the left-hand side there with the sergeant stripes. He and Constable Harding were on duty at Viney Hill in the forest when they encountered a group of drunk miners. A scuffle broke out and both police officers were hit with stones. Harding, though knocked unconscious, regained consciousness and was able to raise the alarm, but Sergeant Morris died of a fractured skull and a broken neck. Later on, the men were all arrested. 3 miners were arrested and convicted of manslaughter. But a sad fact is that at least 18 other serving constabulary officers have been killed while on duty in Gloucestershire. So, it's not the safest profession. I certainly wouldn't like to do it, and I have nothing but admiration for those who do. WPC. So, though the suffragettes had called for female police officers from the late 1890s, early 1900s onwards, the origins of female police officers really lie in World War I and the munitions factories. Because the female workers in these factories had to be searched before entering explosive areas, this was to ensure they had nothing combustible or likely to cause a spark. It was deemed that it was not right and proper for men to do this. So the Women's Voluntary Services contracted with the Minister of Munitions to train and supply women to undertake this task and also to help police munition works. And this lovely photograph here shows some of the original Gloucestershire policemen taken in August 1917 while they were still employed at the National Shell Filling Factory number 5 at Quedgeley. And though these women at the time were known as the Women's Police Service, at the end of the war, many transferred into their local police forces, even though many were reluctant to take them on, which just seems daft. But they take them on, they did eventually. And on 6th of May 1918, the first 8 policemen from the Quedgeley Works joined Gloucestershire Constabulary, and they all literally came straight from the factory doors into the Glospol. They were appointed initially to clerical duties to release men for the job of outside patrol. Excuse me, but after a while this did change and they did actually have outside duties. The first female WPC, Marion Sandover, she was given the number WPC1, although her official collar number was 400. And this is her warrant book, which is held at the archives here. And she enjoyed a lovely long career, not retiring until 1948. And of course, many other WPCs or just police officers they're known now have followed in her footsteps. So Gloucestershire Constabulary's first black officer was Astley Lloyd Blair, sworn in as a special constable 31st of January 1964, aged 27. And there's a great picture of him in one of the patrol cars. He'd been a policeman, full-time policeman in Jamaica for at least 5 years before he came to England with his wife Bernice. She went on to become a nurse at Coney Hill Hospital. So, what a fantastic career these two had. Newspaper headlines assumed he was the first black officer ever in England, but they were wrong, as that title belonged to Officer Cecil Rogers, who'd been a special constable in Plymouth for over 25 years before this. So they got it completely wrong, but it was a great step forward, and long may it continue. Good horse mobility. So the Bow Street Horse Patrol, which was founded in 1763, is technically the oldest police force in the world, and it merged with the Met in 1836. Gloucestershire Police have probably been using horses since the force's inception in the 1840s, though we can't actually confirm this. There's no actual details on it, but this is a lovely set of picture of riders ready for Cheltenham races, I believe. Horses need a lot of maintenance, and this is a lovely little note from basically the superintendent of Stroud to the chief constable asking for issue of horseshoes for Stroud's divisional cob, and if he got the horseshoes or got permission, he'd go and fetch them and take the horse to the blacksmith who'd sort it. Great, isn't it? This year, Gloucestershire's mounted unit, which has been in existence since then, has actually been disbanded due to cost. There's only 3 or 4 horses, and they're quite expensive to run, especially with the vehicles. So now, if we need them, I think we are going to be borrowing Oxford or Avon's horses. So bicycles came into policing in the 1870s with the introduction of safety bicycles. You couldn't really have a copper sat on a penny farthing; it'd be ludicrous. So as soon as the safety bikes came in became normal bicycles, and they enabled policemen to patrol larger areas, especially in towns and cities, where it was much quicker to get around. This lovely photo here. This is PC 614 Ted Moore on his beat in a bike in Cirencester in 1979. A great photo. And however, bikes fell out of favour, but after a period of neglect, they're now coming back into vogue with the police, thanks primarily to their manoeuvrability on crowded pavements and their ability to navigate narrow gaps in congested roads and get down alleys. So, they are coming back. And you see the police nowadays have sort of like the mountain bike sort of thing. A very fit job, I should think. I'm not sure I could do it, that's for sure. So looking at police cars, so the first use of a police car in Gloucestershire, and the first request for one came on the 5th of October 1912 when the Chief Constable of Gloucestershire asked the Standing Joint Police Committee of the Council for permission for the Superintendent at North Leach to use a car instead of a horse and carriage. It might well be this one. This shows a superintendent in a car with his driver at the Royal George circa 1912-1914. So who knows? This might be the very first car. Initially, the police cars were used only by senior officers, but gradually, as we know, they became an integral part of policemen. And this is a couple of Morris cars outside the headquarters in Cheltenham. By the 1950s, cars, now known as patrol cars, were used in earnest. It's another load at Cheltenham here. Although some Fords were used, the most common were Riley Pathfinders, followed by Riley 16s, Woolses, and then post-war, you get Morris, Austin and Hillman cars being used, with the odd Jaguar and Land Rover and Rover thrown in for good measure. Panda cars, we all love them as we refer to them these days. It basically referred to a small economical car, usually featuring distinctive black and white livery. These were used for neighbourhood or area policemen from the 1960s onwards, your Z car basically. The name originated because the vehicles, especially in their early forms, resembled the giant panda with black and white body and door markings, although the white soon sort of gave way to blue. Sorry, the black gave way to blue. So the colour scheme did change. And this photograph from Cheltenham Police Division 1968 shows the first pandas outside Talbot House in Cheltenham. Little Austins there, which I'm sure we all remember. Motorbikes. So the motorbikes first used in the early 1920s. This is a lovely photograph of one of the early WPCs on the bike, handing over or receiving a letter from a superintendent. By the 1960s, they were very, very common. Traffic motorcyclists used large 650cc bikes, and usually Triumphs, while beat riders used lower power 250 machines. So they were getting rid of the push bikes, going onto motorbikes at this time. So many police bikes are also what we call outfits. So motorbikes are sidecars, which allowed a carriage of a passenger or equipment in the chair. And this is a lovely photograph. This is the first motorcycle patrol bike at Lydney in 1930. I love this photo. It's a very bit chilly riding in the snow at Birdlip in 1938. And God, that must have been cold because you only got those little leather gloves on, gauntlets, very cold. Today, you don't get the outfits, don't get the sidecars. You do, police still do use motorbikes, obviously, but they don't have the sidecars anymore, unless anybody else knows different. So, below the 1950s, police vehicles were being routinely fitted with two-way radios. This lovely picture shows a police instructor showing new officers the radio installation in the boot of a patrol car. And I do like this next photo. It's said it's two officers installing a radio set into the boot of a Riley patrol car, but I think that's got the look of a publicity shot. There's no way the engineers are going to let these two flat feet have a go at putting a radio in a car, I don't think. Plain clothes. I like this photo. It's basically straight out of Agatha Christie or Gosford Park. Look at them now, aren't they? Classic 1920s plainclothes coppers. Looking at some specialist diving units, police units, the police diving unit. It began in November 1966. This is one of the first dives they did. The divers are in wetsuits. Notice the ice floating on this. That must have been really, really cold because a wetsuit works by getting the water inside, which then your body heat warms up. So that wouldn't have been pleasant. This is a bit of a photograph of train in Gloucester Docks. You can see the dredger number 5 behind. Once that officer gets underwater, it will be pitch black. All searches are done by hand. But the advantage here is they are now, at least they are now in dry suits, so at least they'll be a little bit warmer than they were earlier. And this is what a lot of them do today. Training. This is retrieving a bike from a pond. I think this is down by St Catherine's there, St Catherine's Pond. And again, dry suits, full face radio, mask. So, you know, everything's a lot better nowadays. Police dogs. Police dogs are really ferocious. Don't mess with them. Happily bite bits off police cars. And if you like your police stories, it's a fair cop on Radio 4. It's brilliant. Wrath of Zeus is a fantastic episode. It's really good. But Gloucestershire Constabulary introduced the first dog unit and dog handlers in 1959. This is Prince, Gloucestershire's Constabulary's first police dog. You can hear him thinking, is he a bad man? Does he have soft, fleshy bits? You know, police dogs are wonderful beasts. This is Police Constable Deacon being trained by a police dog in 1959, and we have here a world champion. This is Police Dog Chan, a regional and national police dog champion from Gloucestershire in 1965. What a handsome boy he is. Helicopter units. So the county first trialled helicopters way back in 1968. And for those of you who know your MASH, this is a Bell Sioux helicopter. So this is the first one they actually trialled. They were successful. So since then, several have been flown. Usually they're Ecurials, the small little squirrel type helicopters. But now they've gone over to Wacos, the Eurocopters, and you'll often see these flying around. They're also used by the ambulance services as well. All these helicopters are not run by the local county force, they're run by the National Police Air Service, although they are assigned, counties are assigned a certain number of helicopters. The base for Gloucestershire used to be at Filton, but it's now at Almondsbury. But Staverton is Gloucestershire Airport, I should say. It's also used as a temporary base. That is where all the maintenance is taken, is undergone for them as well. Drug Squad, Gloucestershire's Constabulary first drug squad, 1967. They look like they're on something to me, but isn't that a great team photo? I think how big that group is now. Arm response, you really, really do not want to mess with these guys. Yeah, just don't even think about it. I have this photo, but how many laws are being broken here? It's obviously a non-rule book way of transporting a police dog. We think the policeman is riding his own personal motorbike, but he's got a pillion passenger who's got a dog on the back. Isn't that a great photo, folks? Love it. And I said earlier, if you want to find out more about the Gloucestershire Constabulary's history, Gloucestershire Police Archives website is the best place to look. Most of the photographs from the police section here come from this website. It's full of fascinating photos, great facts about the history of the police as well. Include the 4th Emergency Services, the AA like to call themselves that. They were formed in 1905 June to help motorists avoid police speed traps. This is a photograph from the Citizen when their last AA patrol motorbikes were replaced with four-wheel cars and vans. Look at nicknames. So I found this quite interesting. So nicknames for the police: cops, coppers. These probably come from the French word caper, and before that, Latin capere, meaning to seize, take, or capture. Thus, a cop or a copper is one who seizes. So he seizes villains and bad guys, which is great. Bobbies and peelers. These are all derived from the name of Sir Robert Peel, founder of the Met. The old Bill, the Bill. This is interesting. This came from nickname for the Met originally, but spread for after World War One, and it probably came because of the rather fashionable moustaches that officers wore, that looked rather like the soldier cartoon character Old Bill by George Barnes' father. You can see there. So this is where we think it comes from. Rozzers is almost an unknown one, but it's thought to be a sort of derivation of Robert and Bobby's, maybe put together, but that's a real one we're not sure about. But the one we all know about, the fuzz, again, origin is uncertain. Some think it's 1960s hippie expression, as it referred to the lack of the hair, but it was actually first used in America in the late 1920s in the criminal underworld. So this makes the hippie explanation quite unlikely. A more widely accepted alternative is it's derived from fuss, meaning one hard to please, and suggesting that the police are fussy over little matters like broken tail lights, no tax, that sort of thing. So that's probably where it comes from, but that's a nice one, the fuzz. In 1934, Spears Bacon Factory in Russell Street in Gloucester caught fire. It was a very, very serious fire. Damage caused by the fire was extensive. but people across the city reported the smell was delicious. And that brings us to the end of the talk. So our next event, our Heritage Hub event on Saturday, is Help Rescue and Mend, a look on the county's emergency services. Please book for the talks. There are 2 talks. Our booking system is actually working really well at the moment, so fingers crossed there'll be no issues with it. In addition to that, there'll be emergency personnel and vehicles on site. Girls, get your lippy out. We've got a fire engine coming. We've got a police wagon coming, and we've got an ambulance as well. And as usual, we've got the usual display of archives, free refreshments, and the Gloucestershire Family History Society will be on hand to help you find your rescue routes. Our next Secrets Revealed talk here will be Around the World in 80 brackets almost archives on 28th of May. We're looking at records of international travel and travellers. And before I sign off, we do have to say a massive thank you today to Katie Pritchard, who's been our behind the scenes technician on all these talks. We couldn't have done them without her, and she is sadly leaving us to go back to her roots in North Wales. So thank you very much for everybody to Katie. And on that note, Jem, I'll hand straight back to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, John. As always, completely amazed by how much information you managed to put together there. Really wonderful. Lots of great stuff that I know I didn't know. I'm sure the same for everybody else. I don't think we have any questions. Andrea would just like to say great delivery and fascinating talk. Thanks, everyone. Thanks very much, Andrea. That is brilliant. And I'll just double check to make sure that there's nothing else I've missed. I don't think so. But just to say thanks to everybody for joining us again this month. We look forward to seeing you hopefully at the next one. Thanks again to Katie for all your hard work with these talks over however long now you've been doing them. And thank you very much, John. Thank you.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much. Okay, folks, cheerio. See you next time. Bye-bye.